Well, welcome once again to the Proclaim podcast. My name is Eric Chow. I'm the director for Proclaim. Proclaim is a mission of the Archdiocese of Vancouver, and its mission is to awaken disciples to proclaim Jesus in our homes and in our communities. We have the privilege of having various guests to come and share some of their stories, their insights, their wisdom, their experience around evangelization, the proclamation of the gospel, parish renewal, all kinds of things that really are at the heart of what the Proclaim movement is about, to enable and to activate those in our communities to be able to share Jesus in a clear and fruitful way. Today, we have a special guest. His name is Peter Andrastek. I hope I got the pronunciation right. You helped me with that earlier, Peter. So welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You got it right.
Yeah, I'm going to apologize in advance because I might kind of go back to what what it sounds like in my head. But before we get into that, let's introduce Peter to the Proclaim community. Peter is a senior consultant with Evangelical Catholic, a movement, an organization in the United States that has been consulting and working in the mission fields for a number of years. But let's hear from Peter first. So, Peter, would you allow our listeners to be introduced by you?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So, as you said, I'm with the Evangelical Catholic. We are an apostolate. We're an organization that's based in Madison, Wisconsin. And what we do is we advise and accompany pastoral leaders to better form and accompany ordinary Catholics to be missionary disciples. Primarily, we partner with parishes, and currently we are partnering with about 180. I think it's between 175 and 180 parishes around the country. We also advise seminarians. We work with the Archdiocese for the U.S. military. We work with a family missions organization, and we also do some campus ministries. So that's, in a nutshell, that's who we are and what we do. I live in the Milwaukee area in Wisconsin, married for 21 years. I've got 8 kids ranging from college down to K4. So yeah, that's me.
You're right in the thick of things with the family life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got the spread.
Yeah, that'll keep you very busy. I've had the privilege of encountering Evangelical Catholic in a variety of different spaces, whether it's in the parish work or their support to priests and coaching and some of the campus ministry. Peter, I'm just very curious, what are some of the highlights or memorable moments or blessings that you've encountered being part of this apostolate?
Well, the first thing that comes to my head right away is just the privilege and the blessing of working in our organization. We have just a phenomenal culture. As they say in the business world, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I really feel like I have like true, meaningful Christian community with my coworkers. We go on retreats together a couple times a year, and we have staff prayer together regularly. It's been a model of both like Christian community for me and like an entrepreneurial, get her done sort of an organization. So that's been the major highlight that comes to my mind first. Also, I'm really enjoying working with seminarians. That's one of the things that I do. And it's just awesome working with these young guys who are so on fire and so open to learn. Excuse me. They're right in the thick of things theologically. And I love doing that. I love nerding out on that stuff. But then we get really practical. One of the things I tell them all the time is, hey guys, just don't be weird, and they love it, and it's real fun hanging out. And then just having the privilege also of working with so many pastoral leaders in dealing with the highs and the lows and the messiness of it all, because church work is really messy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, let's get right into it. For our conversation today, I'd love to talk about the role of the laity, the mission that has been given to us. Let's first define that, and then we'll get into a few other things. But let's first define, like, what does it mean to be the laity? Like, it's kind of a technical term. It's not as often used. So for a lot of Catholics, They could be asking, what is the laity and what's the role of the laity?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's funny, who are the laity? Well, the laity are about 99.91% of the church. Okay. So when we think of the church, we tend to think of clergy, religious, the big monuments of architecture and art and things like that. And really the church is primarily the laity. And all that other stuff is actually at the service of the whole of the Christian faithful. And so the laity are you could say the most ordinary, not mundane, not like mediocre. There's no such thing as mediocre Christianity, but we're the ordinary, the predominant manifestation of what it means to be a Christian. Well, what does that mean? We can understand the laity two ways. We can understand the laity negatively, like who aren't we? So we are not clergy or religious. We're not ordained, or we don't take vows, religious vows. Positively, who are we? We are all those Christians who seek the kingdom of God in and through the ordinary circumstances of everyday life. So our primary, you could say, our jurisdiction, the scope of where we have, you could say, effective authority, and the place where we are called to encounter God is not primarily in a church, not primarily at the parish, but wherever we are. That's going to be our professional work. That's going to be our home. That's going to be our neighborhood, the gym, wherever you hang out. The church, when the church speaks of the laity, he describes the laity as having a secular character or a secular nature, which basically means that the world. Secular comes from a Latin word which means of the age. So our existence is tied to the present age. So that means that, we don't look any different than anyone else. We don't speak any different than anyone else. We don't do things differently than anyone else, other than virtue and holiness. But we should, by our very being, be very attractive and admirable to people. We should be second to none as human beings. And it just means that the world is the setting and the means of our holiness. That's what secular character means.
Yeah. Okay. So the majority of our listeners would fall under that category of laity. Mothers, fathers, anyone who's not clergy, not a priest. Yeah. Okay. And the second part I heard you say is we have a very particular mission field, and it's primarily not the parish. I love that because I think a lot of folks would be listening to this and thinking, what that doesn't sound common, or it's not common. I don't think it's common knowledge that people understand that their primary mission or their primary contribution to the church's mission to make disciples, to spread the kingdom, is not in a parish setting. A lot of parishioners or Catholics who begin to engage in their faith more seriously, as they begin to discover their relationship with God, naturally lean towards engagement or more involvement with a parish rather than to engage in the world more, right? It's almost a
Totally.
bit of a sort of a shift in thinking, or a misunderstanding, if you will. So
Totally.
let's talk about then this mission field that is available and necessary to us, that is part of our mission, because you and I are part of the laity and we have a mission field. So some of that mission field, I would assume, is our own families, the people that are close to us, our workplaces, etc. Can you share a little bit of thoughts around understanding and identifying our mission territory?
Yeah, well, and I think as the Gospel of Mark, Jesus says to preach the God to the whole of creation. Okay, to preach the gospel to the whole of creation, and that means all of created realities, right? So, and that doesn't mean just verbally. That means infuse order into the disorder that sin has, created in the world. Or created is even a bad word for sin, because sin doesn't create anything; it destroys. So that means sanctifying our workplaces and sanctifying our families. And actually, as church workers, as parish workers or diocesan workers, sometimes we can have a bit of a handicap when it comes to imagining what that looks like, because our environment is ecclesial or ecclesiastical.
Yeah.
And so when we try to imagine what it's like to live the gospel at 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 work, we have a hard time making that connection. And so if we don't develop an imaginative vision for that, it's hard to give formation that's calibrated for that secular vocation. So I think part of the difficulty that we face is um, our imagination is shaped by our experience. Okay, it's really difficult to imagine something that you've never experienced, and technically, it's impossible. Okay, if you have zero experience of something, you can't imagine it, because what's in the intellect must pass through the senses, and then must pass through the interior senses. Um, so our experience of holiness and our experience of mission is largely shaped by religious and clergy. The stories of the saints, which are largely religious and clergy. If we're working for the church, we see the people who are always at church. We never see the people who aren't at church. Um, we have experience of grad school. We have experience of seminary. Our experience of learning theology shapes our imagination for what it means to teach theology. And so
Yeah.
all of those things kind of add up to this place where, um, even though the laity, who have the secular character living in the world, are 99.91% of the church, we can't imagine what that vocation or what that mission looks like. So that's part of the difficulty. I'm not sure if I answered the question, or if I got maybe I kind of went off on a tangent, but
No, I hear what you're saying, because we have to have living examples of what it looks like to live differently in the world. And some of the examples that we have don't easily translate into our lived experiences and our very specific current circumstance. So you and I we're dads, we've got kids, and we're looking for examples and ways to understand what it looks like for us to be good fathers in our homes. And if our own experiences of family life comes from a very narrow experience of that, for whatever reason, we haven't been provided the opportunity to see another man model missionary discipleship in the home, then we're left to our own devices, or we're left to project what we see in the lives of the saints, who had a very different context and exhibited their expression of holiness and their love for God in a way that doesn't translate into family life. So, we might love the saints who are living this austere, monastic, pray every day type life, and we're trying to implement that in our homes, and we're just getting everyone angry at us because they're like we're just hungry, and we've got 9 activities in the day, and you're asking us to pray at this time, and we have our heart's not in it, because we're so frustrated by this expression of a life lived that is holy and worthy of learning from, but the skill of translating it into our everyday lives is lost.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I'll give an example. This is probably 15 years ago. I was on a retreat, and I was working for a parish at the time. I've been with the EC since 2011, 2012. So this is probably maybe 2 years before I started working with the EC. I'm on this retreat, and at the time I had 4 kids living in a 2-bedroom apartment, not making ends meet because I'm working for a parish. If I were to ask for a raise, they'd look at me like I have two heads, And I remember really praying about, how do I do this? Am I being selfish? Seek first the kingdom of God, and then all these other things will be given unto you. And so I went into spiritual direction to the priest at the retreat. And I was explaining to him my situation about I'm not making ends meet. Am I being selfish? Am I being too worldly, looking for more money? And he looked at me, he said, first of all, where do you think the kingdom of heaven is? And right away I'm like, oh, my family, right? And then he said, you need to make a lot of money. If you want to be generous with your kids, and if you want to be generous with the church, and if you want to give a credible witness and example to other people, you need to make more money. And I was like, never heard of that before.
Right.
Because my example, I would have St. Francis, in the back of my head, throwing off his clothes and giving it all away. And I needed someone to, first of all, correct me, And then second of all, guide me into, practically speaking, what does this look like for me? What does holiness look like for someone who, for example, has to keep track of their accomplishments for the betterment of their field of work, or
Yes.
just to get a raise? How does that align with um, humility? A religious example of humility. A husband and a wife, you know, who are supposed to look hot for each other. What does modesty look like for them? The popular examples of these virtues, we need help translating those into everyday experience, and not just everyday experience, but even the particular experience of like my circumstances or your circumstances, which are going to be different than someone else's.
Yep. Yeah. And I love what you said earlier about there's no such thing as a mediocre Catholic. Like we can't, like our disposition should be one of a response to greatness, because that's really what God is calling us to. And at the same time, we have to learn how to live in tension with the demands of the world and what necessitates us to live in this world
Mm-hmm.
with the call, that higher calling to holiness. And so it's not, you're not shortchanging the call to humility, modesty,
Mm-hmm.
and the virtues that require us to live a holy life. And at the same time, we're not also shortchanging or like making concessions to live in the world in order to try to be like the world, or whatever could be, expected of a family in society today, right? So
Yeah.
it's
Like,
learning how to give freely and be generous, and at the same time, provide everything that you can to your family.
yep. There's, I think it's in Evangelion Nuntiandi, Pope Paul VI goes off on this one part about like the power of witness, where he talks about like, the ordinary person asking about Christians, why are they in our presence? Like, why do they live this way? And like in wonderment, like we should be second to none as human beings. Like many people, I think sometimes we go one of two ways, right? And again, this is just kind of like popular Catholicism. This is not actually what the church teaches, okay? But like the church's teaching on the laity is wonderful and beautiful and very hidden, unfortunately, from most people's imaginations. But so I think oftentimes when people have a conversion experience, or even prior to that, like just Joe Catholic, okay? Joe Catholic thinks like either I need to like become really like clerical or religious and spend all my time at church and do all these things. That's going to attract some people. Or other people are going to be like, yeah, that religious stuff isn't quite for me. Like, I don't know. It's kind of weird, or it seems kind of weak or whatever,
Yeah.
right? And so what could be very liberating for people is to hear actually what the church teaches is that you feel a gravitational pull towards secular hobbies, sports, music, secular work, interests, things like that. And rightly so. You should not abandon those things. You need to figure out how to sanctify those things and put
Yeah.
Christ at the summit of all those things. And that's an adventurous, you could almost say entrepreneurial outlook. And that's very different. That's much more inspiring. Like, no, like sure, there are certain things that are incompatible, right? There's certain things that are incompatible with trying to live the gospel, but you'll figure that out incrementally, right? You're going to make mistakes. You're going to figure these things out incrementally. But generally speaking, we are not called to conquer or overcome our noble human aspirations, because that implies opposition. Conquering or overcoming implies opposition. We're called to actually sublimate those things, to lift those things up, and then to infuse those things with an evangelical spirit. That's where, as laity, that's where we are called specifically to meet him, such that if we were to try to remove ourselves from those things ordinarily, that would be equivalent to removing ourselves from our ecclesial office. So like
Yeah.
you could almost say that our ecclesial office as lay people is to be in the world. That's our post. Our post in the church is our post in the world. Our post in the world is our post in the church. So, yeah, many people have tried to imitate Jesus in his public ministry, but for the vast majority of Christians, we are called to imitate him in his hidden life. And we forget that he was just as divine when he was a carpenter and businessman.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. When our kids' sports activities or our hobbies take over or become our religion, that's when we find ourselves in trouble. But when we see those as goods to be enjoyed in an appropriate way and mission opportunities, then we should feel confident that we can enjoy them well and at the same time, provide meaningful relationships, the formation of our kids' character through sports, etc.
Absolutely.
And it
Yes.
all has to be, of course, Christ-centered and at the service of our desire to want to become holy and the desire to want to engage in the church's mission.
Yeah. But almost all of the world's problems stem from the inversion of means and end. And so when we hold these secular things as an end in themselves, that's when we begin to run into problems. Money and prestige and, accomplishments, all these things. Those could be really good things. Prestige, yeah, that's your podium for preaching the gospel. But that's a means, right? You have to correctly order these things.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to, and you can correct me, but I'm going to assume, just based on the way that I've heard you and others in Evangelical Catholic talk about the apostolate as it has been a community for you, family, the experience of working in mission together, but also delighting in each other's company and being formed by each other. I'm going to assume that the majority of your formation and understanding of your particular role in the church has come from the apostolate. And however, the majority of people listening and the majority of people the majority of the laity are in parishes. And so their experience of formation is probably as varied as there are parishes, but there's also probably some common positives and some common challenges, pitfalls when it comes to formation for the laity in the parish in order to be of service in the world and to engage in the mission. Let's kind of shift gears a little bit and just talk about parish life and what's the role of a parish in helping you and I and the average Joe Catholic become missionary disciples, faithful disciples who are seeking holiness in their world and also responding to the call to be missionaries, witnesses in the spaces that they find themselves.
Wow. How much time do we have?
6 minutes.
Yeah. So in the church's mind, the role of the parish ought to be the primary locus of our apostolic formation. And so when I say apostolic formation, I mean formation that includes the formation for the apostles. So our apostolate, our mission, is the radiation or outflowing of our interior life. Okay. And so there's really no separation of personal holiness and apostolate. They're two dimensions of the same reality of love. And so we tend to forget about the apostolic dimension sometimes, that requires formation. And so the parish really ought to be the primary locus of where people receive that formation and receive that accompaniment into their vocation to sanctify the temporal order. The parish ought to be the means, the fuel to us being the engine of the church's apostolate, the church's mission. So it hasn't been working for a while. Okay. We've inherited, there's a lot of wonderful people in parishes who are doing a lot of good things, right? But for the most part, what we see is not that. We've inherited, at least in the United States, and I'm guessing that Canada is similar, we've inherited a pastoral structure in a parish that's based on classroom education of children and kind of a town square devotional environment for adults. And it assumes that we're all going to live near the parish. We're all going to have great big families. All of our kids are going to marry each other. and have great big families and live nearby. And the church is going to just kind of keep growing based on the combination of having big families and immigration, because that's how the church in the United States and Canada kind of grew up, parishes. These are oftentimes personal parishes. And so we've inherited this pastoral structure. When I say pastoral structure, I mean not canonical structure, but like a professional ecclesial structure, right? Who are the pastoral leaders and ministers? And it's mostly based on, like I said, classroom education of children, volunteer coordination for adults, social things, outreach, those sorts of things. And that's based on how the church grew up. As a Catholic in the 1930s, I would have raised my kids as best as I could, but I wouldn't have had the education to form them catechetically. So I send them to Father or the nuns, and then I need the social support because I speak Polish mostly, and I need to go where I can be supported and speak the mother tongue and have a shot and a beer with my buddies and listen to the devotional practices and that support, right? And so we haven't quite figured out in the last probably 20 years, there's been a total explosion of awesome Catholic catechetical resources that are out there, podcasts and radio and materials and books. But our pastoral structures in our parishes, we haven't quite figured out how to, at parishes, at the EC, we like to think that we've cracked the code a little bit, but that's another topic. There's a method of implementation or an approach that hasn't quite happened. So parishes haven't quite figured out how to recalibrate their approach to prioritize apostolic formation of adults. So I'll kind of pause right there.
Right. Okay.
And yeah, I'll pause.
Okay. Can't remember if it was earlier in this conversation or if it was pre-recording, but you mentioned a short quote. I think it's from Peter Drucker that, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Yeah. And
yep.
I think some of what you're talking about initially started as some strategy or some kind of like way in which the parish can become structurally set up to support the families and the individuals of the time. And you could say that the culture of that parish has begun to create problems for today that might have been solutions yesterday, or might have been a way to respond to the times yesterday. So you make reference to the 1930s or to a time when the majority of Catholic families, you would see them on Sundays. They're trying to live their lives as best as possible, as aligned to Catholic values. And for the most part, in the West and in the US, and I'd say in Canada as well, you have the majority of society also adhering to a lot of these sort of Catholic values, right?
Totally.
Stores are closed on Sundays, and it's important that we develop children of character and that there's a more clear understanding of what's right and what's wrong. You could almost get away with parishes could almost get away with focus on the sacraments and on some of that sacramental formation, and then the rest of the world's sort of current and the community itself will form the rest of the areas of your life. And I'd say today that's not so much the case anymore. And we're finding ourselves in situations where the sacramental formation and some of the formation that parishes are offering are not, I don't want to say infiltrating, but they're not bleeding into our areas of life where we need help and we need a clear understanding of, some of the ways of life and the aspects of our lives that parishes aren't touching.
Right. Totally.
Yeah. So
totally.
Is that kind of land? Are we on the same page there?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So, parishes in this area of the world grew up in a rather strongly Christian culture. And a Christianized culture has its own positives and negatives, and it opens up gaps, things like that. We're now in a post-Christian society, and what got us here will not get us there, right? What was a workable solution 100 years ago is not working anymore. And it's okay. We just have to see that,
Yeah.
And begin to adjust. It's difficult though when the vast majority of pastoral workers don't have an experience of how a parish operates in a post-Christian culture. Who does, right?
Yes.
What does that look like,
Yeah.
I can tell you this, whenever you look back into, and now I don't have all the exceptions. I'm not a history major or anything like that. But when the church, classically, when the church ventures into mission territories, the church did not typically lead in with catechizing kids and hoping that those kids will go home and evangelize their parents. Typically, when the church does missionary work, you work with the adults because they're the ones who have the highest degree of responsibility. They're the ones who are responsible for the shaping of their own culture, and they're the ones who are raising kids, and they're going to be the first heralds of the gospel for their kids. And so there has to be, I think, the beginnings of a shift, starting small, like a mustard seed. This is not a call to go to your parish with an axe and just chop everything up. There needs to be a mustard seed that grows slowly, of a reprioritization of resources, of people, of time, efforts to focus on actually begin with the most disposed. Who are your most faithful, available, and teachable parishioners? Start with a few of them and begin to actually learn from them, because a lot of your most faithful, available, and teachable parishioners. So here I'm talking to like the pastoral workers, right? The priests, who themselves oftentimes struggle with an imagination for an imaginative vision for lay holiness. Oftentimes you already have people who are already living it. So start small with a smaller group of them to provide some formation to them. But in turn, you're actually going to receive formation because by rubbing shoulders with them, you're going to see the types of things that they grapple with and all the tips and tricks that they've developed for getting in their daily prayer and getting to daily mass and things like that. So there'll be this mutual formation, and then you could begin to form them apostolically, and then you begin to slowly, incrementally scale that over time.
Yeah. Well, that sounds right. And also part of it sounds like that's part of some of the experience that we've seen here in the Archdiocese. It's interesting you use that faithful, available, teachable model. I think some of at least from my experience in hearing it from some of our pastoral workers in parishes, there is somewhat of a challenge in understanding the dispositions of faithful, available, teachable, partly because some of the folks that would seemingly be faithful, available, and teachable, meaning they're present, they're in the parish, they're around, you can have conversations with them. I think some of the experience with some of the folks that come are willing to engage in parish life, but not willing to change the rest of their life. And that can be a challenge because then, how do we find folks who may not be as easily accessible and available to our pastoral workers and to the parish at large? How do we find the folks who are willing to change their, every part of their life? From the way in which they raise their kids, to the way in which they have conversations, to adjusting their entire way of life in order to allow for prayer life to be a meaningful and necessary part of their daily rhythms, etc. I think that might be a challenge for some of our parishes right now. Any thoughts to that?
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to say is just to reassure you and to encourage you have those people. They are there.
They are there.
Okay?
Yes, that's right.
They are definitely there. How do you find them? I would say the first thing to do is pray a novena. Okay, or whatever. Well, however long you want to do it. It's nice. A novena, there's a beginning and an end. Use your favorite saint, the Holy Spirit. I don't care who you partner with in this novena, and pray for faces and names. Ask the saint, ask the Holy Spirit to put on your mind and heart to point you in the direction of the people who are already desiring this and who are most disposed to it. That's how you start. And then it's helpful to understand what those words mean: faithful, available, teachable. So faithful doesn't mean that this person is perfect. It means that this person, on a spiritual level, they have a level of discipleship already. But then also, humanly speaking, these people are mature. Available doesn't mean that they have all the time in the world. But it also doesn't mean that they're traveling for work all the time, because that's just going to frustrate you. These are people who who have the ability or have the desire to avail themselves to deeper formation. And then teachable means that these are people who are humble. They don't think they have the Catholic Church figured out, and they're teachable to you. These are going to be people who you probably already admire. And these are people who have like an attractiveness to them. I don't necessarily mean a physical attractiveness, but I mean like something like a radiance
witness,
about them.
way of life.
Yep. I would say the most important piece of this is desire. So these are people who want this. These are people who you would want to, deal with on a regular basis. And these are people who would want to do this with you and a few of their friends. This would be like a fun endeavor, right? And those qualities would also protect a bit against perhaps too much of a programmatic mentality, because programs don't evangelize people. People evangelize people. Programs can provide really good formation. They could like content. They can provide a good setting and some structure. But at the end of the day, you need people. You need saints. And I would say maybe the last thing, the people who you're looking for are, you got to hear me the right way here, right? But like people who are like natural, like normal, at first, right? So, people who have the focus Fellowship of Catholic University students, they say contagious, right? We all know what that means, right? So a normalness to them. You start there, right?
Yeah. A couple of things that stood out right away that could shift some of the misunderstanding. Available isn't available to, run a program, or available to show up on a Thursday night to teach some kids, or whatever it might be. Availability, when you change the understanding that you're available to receive formation and to be part of a community that is desiring an apostolic understanding of what it means to be Catholic, a truer understanding of what it means to be Catholic. That's the availability that you're looking for. Yeah.
Totally. One way of thinking about this is when you want to start a movement of renewal like this, people are going to see right through anything that implies that you're asking them to do something for the parish.
Yes.
Right? This is not about asking to do something for the parish. This is actually asking if the parish can do something for you. So this is, as ministry staff, as ministry leaders, think of yourself as a means to the end of this person's holiness, rather than this person being a means to some ministry end of the parish. So this is, how can I serve you? Hey, we want to do something great here. We want to start a movement, whatever the language is, your people. But in no way can this imply that you're asking them to do something for the parish.
Right.
And I would say this as well. What are you doing? What does this formation consist of? A big piece that's lacking, I would say, in formation is formation in practices. Okay. So right now, when we think of practices, popularly speaking, when we think of formation, we think of like intellectual or academic catechesis.
Yes.
It's good. It's necessary. We need that.
Yeah.
But we have to shift a little bit without getting rid of that. We have to add in as a primary content, forming people in like a rule of life or a plan of life. Practices of prayer, practices of community, practices of mission. Why practices? Because doing things does something to you. So people adults need formation in the way of Christian life. Practices.
Yeah. And in a way that most closely resembles your existing way of life. So if you taught me how to pray in a parish with those who want to pray, and in a period of time where you've dedicated to it at a parish center, where your Bible has been given to you and your reflections and prompts have been given to you, you might learn how to pray in that moment. But how do you pray at 7:30 a.m. when you've got a kid knocking on the door, and you've got to get half the family needs to get out the door, and food needs to be put on the table, and grocery lists need to be done, and you're looking to try to apply a way of life into an existing way of life, And so practice and community and people that can encourage you and also give you tips and tricks and ways in which that they overcome some of those shifts. That's the kind of practice I think you're talking about, so that it
Yes.
really does like kind of change the way we live and see life overall. Yeah.
So we got to hold a couple things up, right? On the one hand, as lay people, we get the grace to pray in situations that would drive a monk nuts. Okay. So our rule of life or plan of life has to take into consideration our very real, very crazy nuts lives. Okay. On the other hand, that has to be balanced out with we need to set ourselves up for success as much as possible. And we're not going to be really quick to make excuses for ourselves. And there's a certain amount of like, again, there's no such thing as mediocre Christianity. So as lovers, we are not minimalists, and so we need to grow in love, and we're going to try to build a rule of, rather than, it's kind of like, do you build a rule of life or a plan of life to fit your day, or do you build a rule of life, a plan of life as the undergirding of our day? There's a slight, depending upon what kind of bridge you're building, you have to have a different kind of framework, but that framework is still holding the bridge up. So depending upon the type of life, your circumstances, you might need a different kind of a framework, but it still has to be a framework for your day. So, and that's where, so this is where community comes into play. And this is where pastoral leaders come into play who, my capacity for self-deception is like almost infinite. So I can make excuses for myself. I can, today I can convince myself that I'm being too easy on myself. Tomorrow I can convince myself that I'm being too hard on myself. So what we need pastoral workers who are striving for their own formation and to become the best formators possible, so that I can like bounce stuff off of them and they can correct me and encourage me and support me and help me. And I need friends who are doing this along with me, and who we can, as iron sharpens iron, so one Christian sharpens another. So that's it's really important to develop as mustard seeds community to help us grow in this way. And it's a lifelong task. This is a marathon, not a sprint,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We've touched on a lot of different aspects of understanding how to bring about an apostolic expression in our lives, how parishes can support that. I didn't put this in the preparatory notes that I sent over to you, but I want to put in a bit of a plug for Evangelical Catholic's ReachMore model. And I've seen some of the model in a way that provides enough understanding that it's really wanting to accomplish all of what we had talked about today, the capacity to offer a model of formation that is meaningful for individuals to be able to go out into the world and to respond to the mission and the calling that we as the laity have been given. But can I give you some time to plug it, like shameless plug on ReachMore? Just to give a bit more of like the model. And really, what I don't want our Proclaim listeners to take from this is, there's a program that Evangelical Catholic has that now you're going to go look online and see if you can try to pitch it to your pastor as the new program that's going to change everything in your parish. That's not at all why I'm putting this forward. I just want to give Peter a chance to speak into a model that has been, I think, lived out and tested through trial and error, and I'd say like something that you and your counterparts are living out and have experienced, just to give some sense of another way of thinking about how we as parishes and communities can support this apostolic mission that we have.
Yeah. So you want me to describe what
give us some
looks
thoughts?
like?
Just on
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we partner with parishes, there's very levels of intensity of partnership, right? And what we want to do is partner with the pastoral leaders to gradually, incrementally help them to reframe what they're doing, rather than trying to bring people into the parish, bring people in. We want to give them the tools to form people and send them out. And so what you're referring to, ReachMore, is a whole system of formation. When you partner with us, you get an online system you also get a consultant assigned to you. And the consultant is an advisor and someone who can really walk with you and accompany you and help you to customize it to your specific needs. We work with parishes that are very, very small and rural with a pastor, that's it, and to parishes that are, there are parishes in Texas that have 35,000 parishioners, okay? It's like working with a city, okay? So
Yeah.
that and everything in between. And so the formation process really helps you to learn how to start these little mustard seeds of these smaller communities. And then we've developed over the years a formation process. Think of it like basic training, okay? 12 weeks of formation that gets people going on building a rule of life consisting of practices of prayer, practices of community, and practices of mission. And so we advise, the pastoral workers, how to find those people, how to invite those people into this formation, and how not to invite them into the formation. How to run the formation in a way that doesn't seem weird. And then how to, after the initial formation is over, how to begin accompanying those people, for the rest of their life, right? Or and then how to scale that, how to start doing it again and how to start doing it again. And now this movement is beginning to grow after a couple of years. This movement is beginning to grow to the point where it's grinding up against those inadequate inherited structures. And so now what do you do with that? How do you deal with, you could say, the organizational change? Because now it's shifting priorities and shifting things around. And so our consultants have a lot of experience walking with pastoral workers and priests in building up the habits and the virtues themselves to begin making those changes.
Okay, there you go. Thanks for that. Peter, can I give you the last word? Is there something that you would love to encourage our Proclaim listeners, either something that we've talked about or something that's just you're passionate about when it comes to our role in the mission, the apostolic work that we've been called to, or perhaps you might have a practical next first step that you'd love to give to our listeners? As if there's something that you could offer, I want to give you the last word.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So this is good. So I would say this practical next step. All of you who are listening probably have a couple or a few friends who think like you and act like you. You're on the same page, okay, and in terms of your faith. Most of you out there listening have those people in your life. I would say nothing in the church happens outside of community, okay? The Trinity is community, okay? And I would say get together with those friends, make a plan to get together with those friends, propose to them the idea of getting together regularly for some really true, authentic Christian community where you can support each other in developing that rule of life or that plan of life, okay? So practices of prayer, community, and practices of mission. This is the key, right? So if you have a group of friends, like 2, 3, 4 people who you get together with regularly, I don't know, maybe it's weekly, maybe it's monthly, make it fun, make it enjoyable. And every time you get together, here's your framework for conversation. Life, growth, mission. Catch up on life like friends do. Talk about how you're growing and how you're not growing, okay, in your interior life. And then hold each other accountable for mission, okay? So do each of you have 2, 3, 4 people who you are accompanying into growth? These are people who could be far from God. These are people who could be closer to God. But you need each other to hold each other accountable and to encourage each other to get outside your comfort zone and to accompany people evangelically. So that's what I would say is a great next step. Establish some meaningful Christian community where you can talk regularly about life, growth, and mission. Don't leave out the mission part.
Yeah, love that. Peter, thanks so much for taking the time. to being on podcast with us here at Proclaim. And to all of our Proclaim listeners, I hope that this has been a blessing to you. If there's been some value, some insights that you're taking away, my encouragement is to do what Peter said. Find a few folks, have that conversation, perhaps send this podcast to them and say, hey, I listened to this episode, and one of the challenges, one of the invitations has been to reach out to a few of each of you. You can find us at WeAreProclaim.com. We've got various events, trainings, and different initiatives that we are putting together. And at the time of this recording, we're at the late summer of 2025. We are preparing to host our annual Upper Room Conference, where Peter will be a keynote, a workshop presenter. There'll be some time where we'll be able to learn from him, his wisdom, his experience, and the insights that he and Evangelical Catholic have been offering to the church in the United States and abroad. So, Peter, once again, thanks so much for taking the time to being with us on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.